Hi, I'm Ed Bacon, the rector of All Saints Church, Pasadena. Whoever you are and wherever you find yourself on the journey of faith, I hope that you'll find something here that speaks to you. Welcome.
May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be aligned with your love, O God, our strength, our courage, and our freedom. Amen. Please be seated. Here we are on the cusp of 2012, 2013, where perhaps the president and both sides of the aisles of both houses of Congress have averted the fiscal cliff or the fiscal slope or the fiscal speed bump or whatever the economists determined it was later on in 2013. But we, people of the table, have come together to reflect a bit about the year past and also the year to come. And I want to be as informal and personal as possible. And I have 3 points and a poem, just like any good old Baptist sermon. And so that you can keep track, I want to talk about teaspoons, mockingbirds, and light. Teaspoons. One of my favorite holiday cards came from a Jewish member of All Saints Church. She gives here, she worships here, she prays here and for this place. And she counts on this place keeping her oriented, she tells me. And the holiday card said, "Everyone has a teaspoon. And yes, I know a teaspoon is little, and the fire is huge. But there are millions of us, and each one of us has a teaspoon." Amos Oz. Now, Amos Oz was born in Jerusalem. He has been an author and a professor all of his life, and he has been on what I think is the right side of the occupation, which is to call for an end of the occupation of Israel in Palestinian territories. And he has courageously stated over and over and over again the violence that comes from the basic injustice of occupation. He's also a poet, and I wanted to know more. And so a little Google research resulted in this. There is such a thing in Stockholm as the Order of the Teaspoon. And it was launched on the 17th of August, 2006, in the presence of Amos Oz, its spiritual originator. And the order's motto is "For Tolerance Against Fanaticism." And these are the words that inspired the Order of the Teaspoon from Amos Oz's book, How to Cure a Fanatic. Quoting Oz, "I believe that if one person is watching a huge calamity, let's say a conflagration, a fire, there are always 3 principal opinions." Now, my mind is already going to the conflagration in which we live our lives now. Proliferation of guns, gun violence, economic injustice, a culture of violence, religions that have hijacked their founders' purposes and turned them into religions of fear and violence. This fragile earth, our island home, which if we reversed all carbon emissions right now, we would still, for 25 to 50 years, have an increase in the temperature every year, with continued melting of glaciers and ice caps, and very violent weather. Interracial disharmony, violence against women, an outrageous rate of children in poverty, more than 20% in this country alone. The fact that 34 people today died of gun violence, a conflagration. Amos Oz says there are three things, three principal options. Number one, run away, as far away and as fast as you can, and let those who cannot run burn. Two, write a very angry letter to the editor of your paper, demanding that the responsible people be removed from office with disgrace. Three, bring a bucket of water and throw it on the fire. And if you don't have a bucket, bring a glass. And if you don't have a glass, use a teaspoon. Everyone has a teaspoon. And yes, I know a teaspoon is little and the fire is huge, but there are millions of us and each one of us has a teaspoon. Now, he concludes, I would like to establish the order of the teaspoon. People who share my attitude, not the runaway attitude or the angry letter attitude, but the teaspoon attitude. I would like them to walk around wearing a little teaspoon on the lapel of their jackets so that we know that we're in the same movement, in the same brotherhood, in the same order, the order of the teaspoon. Now, as an American who believes in democracy, I have some quarrel with number two. I think letter writing is a good thing, and I think demonstrations are a good thing. And I will continue to write letters and organize demonstrations. And I spiritually join tonight the order of the teaspoon. Mockingbirds. Please turn to that wonderful poem on page 3 of the liturgy. In many ways, Ann Peterson could be called my midwife into poetry. That would be a little hyperbolic, but nevertheless, it was Ann who thought it would be a good thing for us to read poetry at this New Year's Eve service every year. And I wait with bated breath for every publication of a new collection of poems by Mary Oliver. And in October, I received the newest one. And one night, I read the entire volume. And this is the poem I've returned to over and over again. And every time I read it, I am rewarded more deeply than ever before. I've read it to new member classes to tell them that this is what All Saints is about. Helping them move from singing a song that is not theirs to singing their song. Nothing greater can help the conflagration be put out than for everybody in this room and everyone on the planet to learn to sing her song or his song. So, understanding that it's a risky thing to ask you to do for a group to read poetry together, go please to the fourth stanza. Mimicking and elaborating is the beginning of the stanza, and to the third line, so I have to wait a long time. And let's read all the way down to the phrase, true self. So I have to wait a long time for the softer voice of his own life to come through. He begins by giving up all his usual flutter and settling down on the pine's forelock, then looking around, as though to make sure he's alone. Then he slaps each wing against his breast, where his heart is, and copying nothing, begins easing into it as though it was not half so easy as rollicking, as though his subject now was his true self. Now, none of us ever arrives fully at knowing all the facets of our true self. It is a journey. It is not an arrival. And God has created this universe in such a way that every time there's a conflagration, if everyone God made, who is everyone with a navel, if everyone God made learned to stop singing the songs of others and flapped their wings just close to their breast, which is where their heart is, and began singing their true self song, all the conflagrations would be put away. So that's our job. And the song of your true self may be to write angry letters. It may be to be a teacher. It may be a person who goes to the hospital and cares for someone. Maybe someone who writes letters, makes telephone calls, performs surgery, cleans a house. But whatever it is, let 2013 be a year in which we move more closely to our true self. Now, Richard Rohr has a new book out, which will be in stores in February. It's about the resurrection. And he says in this book that nobody can go and discover their true self unless they die to an old self. That's what the crucifixion was. The world dying to its old self, its false self of violence. And Jesus, the nonviolent one, being raised to show the world and to proclaim that peacemaking and nonviolence is the world's true self. And he says that Jesus and most other great spiritual leaders, teachers, make it very clear that there is a self that has to be found and one that has to be let go of or even renounced. We might call our false self our small self or ego, and we might call the true self our soul. Light. I have received a lot of email from people talking about the 10 ways to live your best life in 2013, or the 5 things to do to live your best life in 2013, or the 7 best things. And people even write books about the 8 things that people do. I'm going to give you one. I think the most important thing, there are a lot of other things that we should do, but perhaps the most important thing that we need to do in 2013 is to make sure that we understand that the divine light lives inside each one of us. And whenever we're lost, whenever we're triggered, whenever we're squirrely, whenever we are crazy, stop, be still, and ask God to show you where is God's divine light in you, and get reoriented to that. Now, there's another part of this. If you're going to use the divine light that is within you as your North Star, and understand that the divine light is within you and outside you, God who is known and beyond all knowing, also know that the light is in everybody else. And yes, the light, the divine light, is very heavily disguised in a lot of people. And it is really important this year, when you see somebody else who's weird, crazy, triggered, or squirrely, to think they're out of alignment with their divine light. And I'm going to treat them as though they are projecting and expressing nothing but their divine light. And all of the spiritual masters tell us if we do that, we're acting out of compassion, and a person can actually rediscover their goodness, rediscover their loveliness, rediscover their divine light if we treat them as divine. Those are my 3 points. You heard the poem. You even read it with me. A final story. When we were singing This Is My Song just now, that beautiful song of universalism by, I think, Sibelius is the author of the music. Is that correct? And we started singing that every year on New Year's Eve after the Second Iraq War had begun. George Regas and I had gotten arrested downtown. And then we got let out of jail, and we could go all sorts of places. And I spent a weekend with Cindy, who had lost her son in the Iraq War, in a little encampment near the home of George W. Bush. And her son's name was Casey, and she set up Camp Casey. And so I went and spent the weekend. And Joan Baez came and did a concert the night I was there. And she said this: I used to make fun of George W. Bush. I thought he was stupid and ignorant and idiotic. And then I read his biography. And I got in touch with all of the challenges that he had had to deal with since he was a little boy. And then I realized that the divine light is in him also. And I quit making fun of him. And now I want to sing you a song that is about our being reconciled with everyone. And she sang the song that we just sang. And I asked James if we could start singing it here. In 2013, may we all be a teaspoon. May we all be a mockingbird who sings the song of our true self, not our false self. And may we know that there's this light inside of us, and we're called to let it shine, and we're called to see it in everybody else. Amen.